Friday night, 9:30 p.m., March 25th. Drinking a little bit of coffee. Got some thoughts swirling around the old head here. I'd like to pick up and expound on what I mentioned in one of the last videos I recorded regarding the perversion or inversion of the American dream. And if this conversation goes anything like it did in my head earlier this evening, then there'll probably be a fair amount of swearing involved. So, I'm going to make the first basic assumption, dangerous as it may be, that if you are someone that is listening to this video, the content itself may or may not actually apply to you in the terms of expressing the discontent for those out there that are not doing XYZ. But since I don't actually know who you are, it's hard to say. The likelihood that you stumbled upon the channel or the message, you're probably doing some sort of seeking of truth. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Sometimes it's hard to preface the topic with enough depth, because I take for granted what other people do or do not already know, or what they've listened to, or who they've studied. And I've gone through such a gauntlet of information in the last 2-3 years, and specifically the last 12 months, that it's easy to lose sight of what may or may not be on everyone's radar. But in order to dive into the deep tunnels of truth, you have to be willing to accept probably 99.9% of everything you know or have been told is a lie. And I know that that's hard to take in if you actually sit with it. It's easy to brush that off. It's just kind of a trumped up statistic, but we may get into the gritty details regarding what that 99.9% constitutes. We'll try to refocus here back on the good old US of A and the inversion of the American dream. So, it's not just a single lie that you've been fed, and I mean that in the context, there have been a million lies, I mean that in the context of the perversion and inversion of the American dream. It's multifaceted. The story that we know regarding why people came over here in regards to what we'll call the early settlers of European origin a few hundred years ago was ostensibly to run away from a more tyrannical form of government in England. We're not going to get into the whole Columbus escapade, but if we take that premise and hold that rough idea to be true, that some people got on this relatively small boat and risked everything through horrid conditions to cross the great wide open ocean and colonize a new land from where they came from. Obviously there are already inhabitants. Then we're going to go ahead and think that they had a pretty good reason to do it. So they were fleeing tyranny in the name of freedom. And if we look at the American Revolution that we were fighting off the oppressive British, that's about the last real grain we can hold on to with some solidity for the sake of this conversation, that people came here for freedom. And interwoven in that idea is the idea of a better way of life. And in that instance, they're really linked together, since freedom would lead to a better way of life. And we want to hold on to that concept because it quickly becomes bastardized and perverted over time. there's a very good likelihood that as soon as our country, was born, 1776, that it was already subverted by dark forces at that moment, if not before. Okay? We don't have to go down the rabbit holes too far regarding the Founding Fathers and to what degree they were Masons, Freemasons, and what branch of the Illuminati was involved in the back channels regarding the French assistance, financially aiding us against the British. But there were other forces at play. But let's continue to hold on to that shred that people first came here for freedom, and attached to that is the better way of life. The problem in today's setting is that people mistakenly think that they are still free. We had way more freedom a few hundred years ago than we do today. What we have today is more comfort and convenience. And unfortunately, neither of those mean fuck all in the greater scope of what is important in life. And I mean that in a very long form, long view of history, both present, past, and future history, as crazy of a concept as that sounds. Okay? We have traded out our freedoms, the ones we did have, for convenience. A few hundred years ago, life was a lot more rugged, as we would understand, due to the lack of technological advancements as we perceive them today. But there was more relative freedom, sovereignty, autonomy. That concept of manifest destiny was put out there to go create the life you want. And really, we want to hold on to those early colonialists that came over before we massacred the American Indians and all that kind of nasty shit happened. But the idea to escape tyranny in order to live freely, okay, and how that quickly dissolved thereafter. So people have it in their mind that America's the greatest, and when viewed from the metrics that they've sold you, remember that concept earlier, that these are lies within lies within lies, and there are different forms of lies. There's like the empirical, intrinsic, overt, on its face lie, and then there's the one that's baked into the greater narrative or concept of what they've sold you, of what you want or what is, that's a little less obvious. I'll give you an example. A good one. 9/11 was, terrorist. Okay, that's a terrible lie. There's an inside job by our own government and the Saudis. Or another one, that the modern education system is actually educating children in an appropriate way. Although some people still think so. No, that's a terrible lie. Or another one, that taxation is justified. I think that's one everyone can get on board with as being on its face a crock of shit. And that in fact it's a small group of people that is stealing from everyone else. Okay, those are a little more overt lies. Maybe the education one hard to see through. A less obvious lie would be something of the notion that the larger the GDP of a country, the better it is. That lie is not going to appear to be false when you buy into the construct, the false construct of what is important in life, and then on a greater scale for that country. So if you're tied to the religion of money, okay, which is arguably the most widespread, devastating, and deeply fucking ingrained mind control, virus, parasite religion that more people, percentage-wise, around the globe bend a knee to than anything else. It's heinous, okay? And because you've been sold this understanding of the inverted American dream, of what is important in life, it would make sense, therefore, that the GDP of a country would substantiate the understanding that it is more robust, more healthy, more financially, important, yada, yada, yada. And so, in that line of thinking, it'll make sense. Yeah, GDP is important. But until you completely remove yourself from that matrix box, that version of society is inherently not what is important, you're not going to see that life for what it is. And I probably won't spend any more time teasing that out. I'll let you kind of come to that understanding either later in the video or 10 years down the road or in your next incarnation here on life. Let's try to get back to the topic at hand. Okay? Lies within lies. By the way, right now my current thought is that 0.01% of what is real, the truth that cannot be bridged or fucked with, is the emotions that we experience. I mean, not what causes all of them, but specifically the interpersonal relationships we are able to have on three levels: with other people or animals, with ourselves, and with Trog, or the highest form of consciousness, or source creator, whatever you want to call it, commonly referred to as God. That, I believe, is real, and they haven't been able to remove us from yet, although they very much mess with the things that would trigger or cause or alter an emotional state within you. Just watch anything on TV and you'll know what I'm talking about. So we're breaking down the American dream. More context, groundwork to lay out here. Whether or not you believe America is the greatest country, in today's setting, in terms of how people understand how they would rank things, America would come out very high in terms of geopolitical power and influence, GDP or financial institutions or economic indicators, the relative perceived amount of freedom, which we address and we will continue to address, and other metrics you want to base it on, the proliferation of culture to other countries, and generally how we're able to fuck with whoever we want with little recourse. Right now, for better or for worse, we're generally top dog, okay? And embedded, strongly embedded in that, and what has curried and carried some of that favor, is this desire by other people that do not live in America to immigrate to the United States for these perceived advantages, okay? Not realizing that we are just as fucked as other countries. We just have the more comfortable version of tyranny, and we've been duped into thinking that it's true freedom, and also deluded ourselves that what we are doing to other countries is not only appropriate but justified.